Intellunia, 100 Facts About Trust, Loyalty and Why People Betray. Fall asleep while discovering 100 profound truths about trust, loyalty, and the complex nature of human connection. From the neuroscience of how trust forms in our brains, to the painful reality of betrayal, to the courageous choice to remain open despite being hurt, this soft, reflective bedtime documentary will guide you through the intricate architecture of how we bond, break, and heal with one another. Perfect for winding down at night, this sleep-friendly narration blends scientific insight with emotional wisdom to help your mind slow down and drift off naturally. Learn why trust is biological, why betrayal hurts like physical pain, and why the courage to trust again after being hurt is perhaps the most profound choice a human can make, told in a calm, soothing voice designed for rest. This relaxing bedtime journey is ideal for falling asleep to soft psychological storytelling, gentle nighttime learning about human nature, understanding relationship dynamics and emotional patterns, processing past hurts with compassionate wisdom, sleep-friendly narration and peaceful ambience. Includes insights about how trust forms in the brain from infancy through adulthood, why betrayal registers as pain in the same regions as physical injury, the difference between loyalty and enabling, how to rebuild trust after it's been shattered, why some people betray and how to recognize patterns, the role of vulnerability, authenticity, and repair in lasting bonds, cultural differences in trust and the impact of power dynamics, post-traumatic growth and finding meaning after betrayal, self-trust, worthiness, and the courage to stay open. Subscribe to Intellunia for more soft, soothing documentaries about psychology, human connection, and the deep truths that shape our lives, perfect for learning, reflecting, and letting go. Imagine two children on a playground, one extending their hand to help the other climb a tree. In that single moment, something extraordinary happens. A silent contract forms, invisible yet powerful. This is where we begin our journey into the intricate world of trust, loyalty, and the painful reality of betrayal. Trust doesn't begin in our minds, it begins in our bodies. Long before we can speak or reason, our infant brains are mapping the world through a simple question: am I safe? When a baby cries and a caregiver responds, neurons fire and wire together, creating the first blueprints of trust. This process happens in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, literally shaping the architecture of how we'll relate to others for the rest of our lives. Researchers have found that these early experiences don't just influence our feelings, they change our brain structure itself. As we grow, this biological foundation encounters something fascinating. Trust actually functions like a currency in human societies. Anthropologists studying communities across the globe have discovered that groups with higher levels of social trust experience measurably better outcomes, stronger economies, better health, and even longer lifespans. It's not metaphorical. Trust reduces stress hormones like cortisol, which over years translates into tangible physical benefits. In this way, every handshake, every kept promise, every moment of reliability is a deposit into an invisible bank that enriches entire communities. But here's where the story deepens. The human brain processes betrayal in the same regions that process physical pain. When someone breaks our trust, the anterior cingulate cortex lights up on brain scans in patterns nearly identical to when we experience a physical wound. This isn't weakness or drama, it's evolutionary wisdom. For our ancestors living in small tribes, betrayal could mean death. Being cast out or abandoned was often fatal, so our brains evolved to treat social pain as seriously as a broken bone, warning us, pay attention, this matters for your survival. Within this landscape of connection and pain, loyalty emerges as something distinct from trust. Loyalty is trust extended through time, even when it becomes difficult. While trust is given in a moment, I trust you'll catch me if I fall, loyalty is the commitment to keep showing up, even when catching becomes costly. Studies of long-term relationships reveal that loyal individuals don't experience fewer doubts or frustrations. Rather, they've developed what psychologists call commitment mechanisms that help them persist through uncertainty. Now we arrive at an uncomfortable truth. Most people who betray don't see themselves as betrayers. Social psychology research consistently shows that when people violate trust, they engage in what's called moral rationalization. They reconstruct the narrative. They weren't betraying, they were protecting themselves, or the other person deserved it, or circumstances left no choice. This isn't necessarily dishonesty, it's how human minds maintain their self-image as good people while doing harmful things. The reasons behind betrayal reveal something profound about human nature. People betray most often when they feel invisible or undervalued. Interview studies with individuals who violated trust in relationships, workplaces, and friendships show a common pattern. Betrayal often grows from accumulated feelings of being unseen, unheard, or unappreciated. The affair partner who felt taken for granted, the employee who leaked secrets after years of ignored contributions, the friend who spread rumors after feeling sidelined. Betrayal frequently emerges not from strength but from a wounded sense of worth. This connects to something neuroscientists have discovered. The brain's reward system treats social acceptance as valuable as food or water. The ventral striatum, which processes rewards, activates when we feel included and valued by others. When that acceptance is withdrawn or feels threatened, the brain experiences it as deprivation of something essential. This helps explain why betrayal so often springs from social pain. People are trying to regulate a system in their brain that's signaling danger and scarcity. Yet trust has a remarkable resilience built into it. Trust can actually grow stronger after being broken and repaired than it was originally. Research on relationship repair shows that when someone violates trust but then engages in genuine accountability, transparency, and changed behavior over time, the rebuilt trust often develops deeper roots. It's as if the break and repair process teaches both parties something they didn't know before: how to navigate rupture, how to communicate needs more clearly, how to value what was nearly lost. And here's perhaps the most hopeful fact to carry with us as we continue this journey. Humans have an innate predisposition toward trust, not suspicion. Developmental psychologists have found that children naturally begin with trust. They must be taught wariness. Even adults, despite experiences of betrayal, continue to extend trust more often than withhold it. This isn't naivety, it's the foundation that makes all human cooperation possible. We are, at our core, a species that wants to connect, that needs to rely on others, that keeps rebuilding bridges even after they've burned. As we move deeper into this exploration, hold these foundations in your mind: the biological roots of trust, the social architecture it creates, and the very human ways it breaks and mends. As we settle deeper into understanding the fabric of human connection, we need to examine something that happens beneath our awareness, in the space between people where trust either flourishes or withers. Trust operates on multiple timescales simultaneously. Think of it as layers. There's instant trust, which forms in the first 7 seconds of meeting someone based on body language and facial expressions. Then there's earned trust, built through consistent actions over weeks and months. And finally, there's deep trust, what psychologists call relational trust, which can take years to develop and involves vulnerability at the most intimate levels. Each layer has its own rules, its own fragility. You can damage deep trust with a single lie, but that same lie might not even dent surface-level trust with a stranger. This layering matters because of something researchers have discovered. The closer the relationship, the more devastating the betrayal feels. Betrayal by a spouse causes more profound psychological damage than betrayal by a colleague, not because one action is objectively worse than the other, but because intimate betrayal violates trust at all 3 levels simultaneously. It's not just the broken promise, it's the shattered foundation beneath every shared moment. Brain imaging studies show that betrayal by loved ones activates not just pain centers but also confusion networks in the brain, as if our neural systems are trying desperately to make sense of something that shouldn't compute. Yet here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Most acts of betrayal are preceded by smaller violations that were ignored or forgiven. Marriage researchers following couples over decades found a pattern. Major betrayals like affairs rarely appear out of nowhere. They're almost always preceded by what therapist John Gottman calls betrayals of trust too small to seem worth addressing, forgotten promises, dismissed feelings, gradual emotional withdrawals. It's as if trust erodes like a riverbank, grain by grain, until one day the whole structure collapses and everyone acts surprised. This gradual erosion reveals something crucial about loyalty. Loyalty requires what psychologists call active maintenance. Unlike trust, which can sometimes coast on past deposits, loyalty demands ongoing investment. Studies of friendships lasting 40, 50 years show that these relationships survive not because nothing ever goes wrong, but because both people continuously choose recommitment. They check in, they repair small hurts before they calcify, they renegotiate what loyalty means as life circumstances change. The longest-lasting bonds aren't the ones that never fracture, they're the ones where people keep choosing to mend the fractures. Now we must confront something uncomfortable about human nature. People are capable of compartmentalizing loyalty in ways that seem contradictory. A person can be deeply loyal to their family while betraying their business partner. They can be faithful to a friend while lying to a spouse. Neurological research suggests this isn't pure hypocrisy. Different relationships appear to be processed in somewhat separate neural networks. We literally use different parts of our brain when thinking about our children versus our colleagues. This compartmentalization helps explain how someone can genuinely feel like a loyal person while actively betraying trust in another domain of life. This connects to a disturbing reality about betrayal. The capacity to betray is correlated with intelligence and creativity. Studies examining deception across populations found that more cognitively complex individuals often make more effective betrayers because they are better at managing contradictory information, maintaining false narratives, and predicting what others will believe. This doesn't mean intelligent people betray more, but when they do, they are often more sophisticated about it. The same mental flexibility that helps someone solve problems or create art can be weaponized to rationalize betrayal and manage its aftermath. But before we lose faith entirely in human connection, we need to understand something protective about how loyalty actually works. True loyalty is selective by necessity, not by flaw. Anthropologists studying social networks across cultures consistently find that humans can maintain genuine loyalty to approximately 5 to 15 people, what's sometimes called our sympathy group. Beyond this, our brains struggle to hold the complex emotional maps required for real loyalty. This isn't coldness, it's cognitive limitation. We have finite resources for deep connection. Understanding this helps explain why betrayals sometimes happen not from malice but from overextension. Someone spread too thin, making implicit promises they couldn't possibly keep to too many people. The environment we create around ourselves shapes our capacity for both trust and betrayal in surprising ways. Scarcity thinking promotes betrayal, while abundance thinking promotes loyalty. Economic psychology studies reveal that when people believe resources are limited, whether money, love, attention, or opportunities, they are more likely to engage in zero-sum thinking. Your gain is my loss. This mindset activates competitive rather than cooperative neural circuits. In contrast, when people feel resourced and secure, the same individuals demonstrate much higher levels of trustworthy behavior. It's not that poverty causes betrayal or wealth ensures loyalty, but the feeling of scarcity versus abundance literally changes how our decision-making centers weigh short-term gains against long-term relationships. Here's something that might surprise you about how we detect betrayal. Humans are actually terrible at consciously detecting lies, but excellent at unconsciously sensing them. Research on deception detection shows that when people try to actively spot lies, they perform barely better than chance, around 54% accuracy. But physiological measures tell a different story. Our bodies often know before our minds do. Heart rate variability changes, microexpressions of doubt flash across faces, gut feelings emerge. The problem is we've been taught to ignore these signals, to override our intuition with rational analysis. Many people who've been betrayed report that something felt off long before they had proof. Their unconscious systems were picking up microscopic inconsistencies their conscious minds refused to acknowledge. And finally, as we prepare to go even deeper into this journey, consider this. The way someone handles small disappointments predicts how they'll handle major betrayals. Longitudinal studies tracking people through various relationships found that individuals who catastrophize minor letdowns, who can't distinguish between a forgotten birthday and a serious violation, often struggle to maintain long-term bonds. But more interestingly, people who minimize or dismiss small hurts also end up in trouble, because they don't address problems until they've metastasized. The people who navigate trust most successfully are those who can calibrate their responses, taking small violations seriously enough to address them, but proportionally enough to preserve the relationship. As we continue forward, we're beginning to see that trust, loyalty, and betrayal aren't simple binaries of good and bad, faithful and faithless. They're complex dances we perform with others, with steps we learned before we could walk, in rhythms both biological and cultural. We've traveled through the foundations of trust and witnessed the patterns of its breaking. Now we must venture into deeper territory, the hidden mechanisms that govern why some bonds endure while others shatter, and what happens in the aftermath when everything falls apart. Betrayal trauma creates a unique form of psychological injury that differs from other types of trauma. When someone we trust deeply violates that trust, it doesn't just hurt, it fundamentally disrupts our sense of reality. Psychologists call this betrayal blindness, a phenomenon where victims sometimes can't even perceive or remember the betrayal clearly because acknowledging it would threaten their entire understanding of safety and connection. Combat veterans, assault survivors, and betrayal victims all experience trauma, but betrayal trauma uniquely damages our ability to trust our own judgment. It whispers, "If you were wrong about this person, what else are you wrong about? Who else might hurt you? Can you even trust yourself to see danger coming?" This creates a cascade effect in the brain and body. Chronic betrayal activates the same stress responses as ongoing physical threat. Studies measuring cortisol levels in people experiencing repeated trust violations, whether in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, or dysfunctional families, show patterns identical to soldiers in combat zones. The body doesn't distinguish between a psychological ambush and a physical one. Heart disease, autoimmune disorders, digestive problems, even accelerated aging at the cellular level, these aren't metaphors for emotional pain. They're the biological price we pay when our trust is repeatedly weaponized against us. Yet within this darkness lies something remarkable about human resilience. People who successfully heal from betrayal often develop what's called post-traumatic growth. Research following individuals through recovery from major trust violations found that many don't just return to their baseline, they develop enhanced capabilities. They become better at setting boundaries, more discerning in relationships, more compassionate toward others who've been hurt, and paradoxically, more willing to trust again, but with wisdom rather than naivety. It's as if the breaking and healing process teaches them to build a more sophisticated trust, one that includes the possibility of pain without being paralyzed by it. But healing requires something specific, and this is where many people get stuck. Genuine repair from betrayal requires what researchers call the 4 Rs: recognition, responsibility, remorse, and reparation. When someone violates trust, they must first recognize the full impact of what they've done, not minimize or deflect. They must take complete responsibility without but/or excuses. They must demonstrate genuine remorse that prioritizes the hurt person's pain over their own discomfort. And they must make reparations, concrete actions over time that rebuild safety. Skip any of these steps, and the wound remains open beneath whatever surface healing appears to occur. This is why "I'm sorry you felt that way" lands so hollow. It's recognition without responsibility, words without the weight of true repair. Now we must examine something that complicates our entire understanding of loyalty. Loyalty and enabling are separated by a single crucial element: accountability. Think of a parent who keeps bailing out an adult child struggling with addiction, or a friend who lies to protect someone who's hurt others, or a colleague who covers for incompetence out of loyalty. These feel like loyalty in the moment, standing by someone no matter what. But research on enabling behaviors shows they actually perpetuate harm and prevent growth. True loyalty includes the courage to hold people accountable, to let them face consequences, to say hard truths they need to hear. The most loyal thing is sometimes the thing that feels like abandonment, refusing to participate in someone's self-destruction. This brings us to a painful reality about why people stay in situations where they are repeatedly betrayed. Intermittent reinforcement, where trustworthy behavior is unpredictable, creates stronger bonds than consistent behavior. This isn't a flaw in human psychology, it's how our reward systems evolved. When rewards are predictable, our brains habituate and stop paying close attention. But when someone is sometimes wonderful and sometimes terrible, our brains become hypervigilant, always trying to predict and control the outcome. This is why abusive relationships are so difficult to leave, why toxic friendships persist, why people give one more chance repeatedly. The biochemistry of intermittent reinforcement is similar to gambling addiction. The unpredictable reward keeps us hooked more effectively than consistent kindness ever could. Yet not all betrayals are created equal in their impact or their meaning. Context determines whether a violation is experienced as betrayal or as forgivable human error. Social psychology research reveals that when someone breaks trust under extreme duress, poverty, threat, exhaustion, mental health crisis, people are much more likely to maintain the relationship and rebuild. But when the same action occurs in conditions of safety and choice, it's experienced as deep betrayal. A mother stealing food for her starving children versus a wealthy person embezzling for luxury. The action is identical, but the meaning transforms completely based on context. This helps explain why some relationships survive what looks like devastating violations while others crumble under seemingly minor infractions. There's something else happening beneath our conscious awareness when trust is tested. Humans unconsciously test the trustworthiness of others through small, strategic vulnerabilities. You share something mildly personal and watch what happens with that information. You ask a small favor and notice whether it's honored. You show a minor weakness and observe whether it's exploited or protected. These aren't consciously planned experiments, but our social brains are constantly running them, gathering data about who's safe. People who pass these microtests earn incrementally more trust. People who fail them, who gossip about what you shared, who forget the favor, who mock the vulnerability, get unconsciously recategorized as less trustworthy, often before we can even articulate why we're pulling back. This testing system connects to something fascinating about reciprocity. Trust has an asymmetric quality. It takes many positive experiences to build, but only one negative experience to destroy. Behavioral economists studying trust games found that it takes an average of 6 to 8 positive interactions to outweigh the impact of a single betrayal. This mathematical reality shapes all our relationships. It means trust is always more fragile than we want to believe, always requiring more maintenance than seems fair. But it also reveals why small, consistent trustworthiness matters so much. Each kept promise, each honored boundary, each moment of reliability is literally counterbalancing the statistical inevitability that humans sometimes fail each other. And here's something that brings us full circle to where we began. Trust is ultimately a choice, not a feeling. We often think of trust as something that naturally arises when conditions are right, an emotion that overcomes us or abandons us. But researchers studying sustained relationships of all kinds, marriages, partnerships, friendships, teams, found that people who maintain trust over decades describe it less as a feeling and more as a practice. They choose to trust even when fear whispers warnings. They choose to be trustworthy even when betrayal would be easier. They choose to stay vulnerable even after being hurt. This doesn't mean being foolish or ignoring red flags. Wisdom and discernment remain essential. But it means recognizing that trust, at its deepest level, is an act of will, a decision to keep building bridges toward other people even though you know bridges can burn. As we venture into the final segments of our journey, we carry with us this growing understanding. that trust, loyalty, and betrayal are not simple moral categories but complex human experiences, shaped by biology and culture, neuroscience and choice, our worst moments and our best possibilities. As we move deeper into our exploration, we begin to see patterns emerging, threads that connect individual moments of trust and betrayal to the larger tapestry of human society. What happens between two people ripples outward in ways we rarely recognize. Cultures differ dramatically in how they construct and maintain trust. In societies that anthropologists call high-trust cultures, like Scandinavia or Japan, people tend to extend trust broadly to strangers and institutions, operating on an assumption of collective reliability. In low-trust cultures, often those with histories of colonization, oppression, or political instability, trust remains tightly confined to family and close networks, with strangers viewed with automatic suspicion. Neither is inherently better. They are adaptive responses to different social realities. But these cultural patterns shape everything from economic development to mental health outcomes. In high-trust societies, stress hormones run lower, cooperation happens more easily, but betrayal feels more shocking. In low-trust societies, vigilance is exhausting, but betrayal is expected, painful, but not surprising. Understanding this helps explain why someone from one cultural context might seem paranoid to someone from another, or why someone might seem naively trusting when they are simply operating from different cultural software. This cultural dimension reveals something about power and trust that makes many people uncomfortable. Trust flows more easily downward than upward in hierarchies. Sociological research examining workplace dynamics, political systems, and even family structures shows that people in positions of power consistently trust those beneath them less than subordinates trust leaders. The boss assumes employees will slack off if not monitored. Employees generally assume the boss is competent until proven otherwise. This asymmetry isn't accidental, it serves power structures. Those who benefit from hierarchy need those below them to trust and comply, while simultaneously maintaining skepticism that justifies surveillance and control. Recognizing this pattern helps explain why marginalized groups often have sophisticated awareness of power dynamics that privileged groups don't see. When you're on the receiving end of suspicion, you develop literacy in trust politics that those doing the suspecting never need to learn. Yet power dynamics don't tell the whole story of trust in organizations and communities. Shared vulnerability creates stronger bonds than shared success. Military units that have faced combat together, teams that have survived organizational crises, families that have weathered serious illness. Research consistently shows these groups develop deeper trust than those who've only experienced good times together. There's something about being seen at your worst, about having others witness your fear or failure and stay anyway, that creates unshakable bonds. Success can be performed. You can hide your true self while winning. But vulnerability strips away pretense. When someone sees you broken and doesn't abandon you, doesn't exploit your weakness, doesn't diminish you, that's when trust moves from intellectual to cellular, when you know in your bones that this person is safe. This truth about vulnerability connects to something counterintuitive about who betrays whom. The people most likely to betray you are those who've betrayed themselves first. Therapists working with individuals who've violated trust in major ways report a consistent pattern. Before the external betrayal, there was internal betrayal. The person who cheats on their partner has usually been ignoring their own needs or values for years. The friend who spreads your secrets has been silencing their own truth. The colleague who sabotages you has been compromising their own integrity in small ways. This doesn't excuse the harm they cause, but it reveals that betrayal often isn't about you at all. It's the external manifestation of someone's fractured relationship with themselves. People who are integrated, who live in alignment with their own values, who honor their own boundaries, these people rarely betray others because they are not in the habit of betraying themselves. Now we must examine something that challenges our assumptions about honesty and trust. Radical honesty can be a form of cruelty, not virtue. While lies and deception damage trust, the research on relationship satisfaction shows that people who claim to always be honest no matter what often cause significant harm. There's a difference between lying and having boundaries around what you share. The person who tells their partner every fleeting attraction they feel, every critical thought, every comparison, they're not being virtuously honest, They're often dumping their internal experience onto others without filtering or taking responsibility for their own feelings. Trustworthiness includes discernment about what needs to be shared and what needs to be processed privately. The healthiest relationships have what researchers call optimal honesty, truthfulness about things that affect the relationship, combined with appropriate privacy about internal experiences that don't require shared processing. This nuance about honesty reveals something deeper about the nature of loyalty in intimate relationships. Long-term partnerships require what psychologists call positive illusions to survive. Studies following couples over decades found that the healthiest marriages involved partners who saw each other slightly more positively than objective observers did. They genuinely believed their partner was funnier, more attractive, more capable than neutral third parties rated them. This isn't delusion, it's a kind of generous seeing, a choice to focus on strengths while acknowledging but not obsessing over flaws. Couples who saw each other with perfect accuracy, or worse, with negative bias, had much higher divorce rates. Loyalty, it turns out, sometimes requires a willingness to perceive your person through a lens of affection rather than harsh assessment. The line between healthy positive illusion and denial is real, but so is the danger of corrosive realism that picks apart every flaw. Yet even as we recognize the value of generous perception, we must acknowledge a painful truth about patterns. People who've been betrayed once are statistically more likely to be betrayed again, not because they deserve it, but because betrayal changes what they tolerate. Trauma researchers studying repeated victimization found that after a major trust violation, people's threat detection systems can become paradoxically less effective, not more. Some become hypervigilant in ways that push away trustworthy people while missing red flags in familiar patterns. Others, in an attempt to prove they're not broken or paranoid, override their intuition and give trust too quickly to prove to themselves they can still connect. It's a cruel irony. Betrayal can teach you exactly the wrong lessons, making you either too closed or too open, when what's needed is calibrated wisdom. Breaking this cycle requires intentional healing work, not just time passing. This cycle reveals something about the neuroscience of habit and relationship patterns. The brain treats relationships as predictive models, constantly updating based on experience. When you grow up with reliable caregivers, your brain builds a model that says people are generally safe and responsive. When you experience betrayal, your brain updates the model. People who seem safe can become dangerous. But here's the crucial part. The brain doesn't just update beliefs, it updates what feels familiar. People gravitate toward what feels familiar even when it's harmful, because the brain prioritizes prediction over happiness. This is why someone betrayed by a narcissistic parent might later marry a narcissistic partner, not because they want to be hurt, but because their brain recognizes the pattern and mistakes recognition for rightness. The familiar feels safe even when it's dangerous, and the genuinely safe can feel threatening because it's unfamiliar. Breaking these patterns requires something specific and difficult. Healing from betrayal requires grieving not just what happened, but what will never be. Therapists specializing in betrayal trauma emphasize that recovery isn't just about processing the violation itself, it's about grieving the loss of the future you imagined, the person you thought you knew, the story you believed you were living. Someone betrayed by a spouse must grieve not just the affair but the marriage they thought they had and the decades they imagined stretching ahead. Someone betrayed by a close friend must grieve not just the specific violation but the shared history they now question and the future plans that dissolve. This grief is often more painful than anger, which is why many people stay stuck in rage. It's easier than surrendering to sorrow. But healing requires feeling the full weight of loss before you can build something new. And here's something essential about that building process. Post-betrayal growth requires deliberate meaning-making, not just time. Simply waiting for wounds to heal rarely works. Psychological research on trauma recovery shows that people who actively work to construct meaning from their painful experiences, through therapy, journaling, creative expression, helping others with similar experiences, show significantly better outcomes than those who try to forget or minimize. This doesn't mean everything happens for a reason or toxic positivity. It means asking, what can I learn about myself from how I responded? What do I want to take forward and what do I want to leave behind? How can this terrible experience contribute to the person I'm becoming? The meaning doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it from something that happened to you into something you've integrated and grown around. As we approach the culmination of our journey, we're beginning to see that trust, loyalty, and betrayal aren't just about interpersonal dynamics, they're about how we construct meaning, how we navigate an uncertain world, how we choose to keep reaching toward connection despite knowing the risks. As we near the end of our journey together, we must explore the most profound questions: how trust shapes not just our relationships, but our very sense of self, and what it means to live wisely in a world where betrayal is always possible yet connection remains essential. The greatest predictor of whether someone will betray isn't their character but their circumstances. Social psychology research has consistently shown something humbling. Given the right combination of pressure, opportunity, and rationalization, almost anyone is capable of violating trust. The Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram obedience studies, and decades of follow-up research reveal that ordinary people commit extraordinary betrayals when systems and situations create the conditions for it. This isn't moral relativism. Actions still have consequences, and some people resist where others capitulate. But it challenges our comforting belief that betrayers are fundamentally different from us, that we could never do such things. The truth is more unsettling. The line between trustworthy and treacherous runs through every human heart, and circumstances determine which side we express. Understanding this doesn't excuse betrayal, but it does cultivate humility about our own capabilities. This humility connects to something about self-knowledge and integrity. People with strong self-awareness are less likely to betray others because they recognize their own capacity for harm. Research on moral development shows that individuals who've done serious work examining their own shadows, their jealousies, their resentments, their capacity for cruelty, actually behave more ethically than those who believe themselves incapable of wrongdoing. When you know you're capable of betrayal, you stay vigilant. You notice when circumstances are pressuring you toward violation. You build systems to keep yourself accountable. Paradoxically, people who trust themselves least to be automatically good often behave most trustworthily, because they don't rely on good intentions, they verify through actions and accountability structures. Yet even with self-awareness and good intentions, humans face a fundamental challenge. Every act of trust is a gamble with incomplete information. Game theory research studying trust dilemmas shows that we never have full knowledge about another person's intentions, capabilities, or future circumstances. Trust always involves extending beyond what you can verify, making yourself vulnerable before you have proof of safety. This is why trust feels simultaneously essential and terrifying. It requires acting on insufficient data, leaning into uncertainty, accepting that you might be wrong. The alternative is complete isolation, but the cost is potential betrayal. We navigate this impossible dilemma every day, calibrating how much to risk with each person, knowing our calculations might be wrong. This uncertainty reveals something about the relationship between trust and control. The need to control is often a trauma response to betrayal, not a character flaw. When someone has been deeply hurt by violated trust, their nervous system learns that vulnerability equals danger. The brain's solution is to attempt control, monitoring their partner's phone, micromanaging employees, requiring constant check-ins from friends. From the outside, this looks like jealousy, possessiveness, or manipulation. From the inside, it feels like survival. Trauma therapists emphasize that healing requires recognizing that control is an attempt to manage anxiety, not an actual solution to trust problems. Real security comes not from controlling another person, which is impossible anyway, but from building your own resilience, knowing you could survive even if the worst happened. The person who can trust doesn't need certainty, they've made peace with uncertainty. This peace with uncertainty connects to something profound about the nature of commitment. Commitment isn't about eliminating other options, it's about choosing one option repeatedly. Popular culture often portrays commitment as a single dramatic moment: the wedding vow, the promise of loyalty, the declaration of best friendship. But research on lasting relationships reveals that commitment is actually thousands of small choices made over years. Every day you choose to stay, to invest, to repair rather than abandon, to prioritize this bond over other possibilities. People in enduring relationships don't necessarily have fewer doubts or temptations than those whose relationships fail. They simply have a more robust practice of choosing each other despite the doubts. This reframes loyalty from a static state to a dynamic practice, which feels less romantic but far more real. Now we must confront something about betrayal that reshapes how we think about forgiveness and moving forward. Betrayal often reveals truths that were already there but unseen. When people reflect on major betrayals after years have passed, many report recognizing in hindsight that signs existed all along. Discrepancies they explained away, inconsistencies they ignored, intuitions they overrode. The betrayal didn't come from nowhere, it revealed something that existed beneath the surface. This is important because it means healing isn't just about recovering from what happened, it's about learning to see more clearly, to trust your perceptions, to notice when you're lying to yourself about what you're seeing. The gift buried in betrayal, if you can excavate it, is often a clearer vision of reality and a stronger trust in your own judgment. This clearer vision helps us understand something about the social contagion of trust and betrayal. Trust and betrayal both spread through networks like viruses. Network science research studying how behaviors propagate through social groups found that when one person in a network experiences betrayal, it affects not just that relationship but ripples outward. Their increased wariness influences friends, who become more guarded, which affects their relationships, creating cascading effects. Similarly, when someone witnesses trustworthy behavior, seeing someone keep a difficult promise, watching repair done well, observing loyalty under pressure, it raises the trust baseline for everyone who witnesses it. This means your choices about trustworthiness aren't just personal, they are social interventions that shape the entire ecosystem you're part of. Every time you honor your word when it's difficult, you're not just affecting one relationship, you're teaching everyone watching what's possible. This social dimension reveals something about collective healing and cultural change. Societies recovering from widespread betrayal, war, genocide, institutional abuse, follow similar healing patterns as individuals. Truth and reconciliation processes, collective memorialization, institutional reform, restored justice, these are the societal equivalents of recognition, responsibility, remorse, and reparation. Nations that skip these steps, that try to move on without addressing betrayal, end up with unhealed collective trauma that erupts in future generations. Psychologists studying intergenerational trauma have found that betrayals that aren't addressed, hidden family secrets, unacknowledged historical harms, get transmitted to children and grandchildren who weren't even present for the original violation. The body keeps score, and so does the culture. Healing requires truth-telling, even when it's painful, even when it disrupts comfortable narratives. Yet even as we recognize the necessity of truth, we must acknowledge something paradoxical about memory and betrayal. Our memories of betrayal aren't photographs, they are stories we revise constantly. Neuroscience research on memory consolidation shows that every time we recall an event, we slightly alter the memory. Studies of people recounting betrayals found that details shift over time. Sometimes the betrayal grows larger in memory, absorbing other disappointments. Sometimes it shrinks as context emerges. This doesn't mean betrayals aren't real or that hurt is imaginary. It means that the story we tell ourselves about what happened evolves, and we need to hold that story with some humility. The narrative you have today might not be exactly what future you will remember, and neither version may be precisely what happened. This uncertainty isn't weakness, it's the human condition, and recognizing it can help us stay open to new understanding rather than locked into a single story forever. And finally, as we prepare to conclude this journey, we must embrace perhaps the most difficult truth of all. Learning to trust wisely doesn't mean learning to never be betrayed, it means learning that you can survive betrayal and still choose connection. The goal isn't to become invulnerable, to build walls so high that no one can hurt you, to develop such sophisticated detection systems that you never miss a red flag. That path leads to isolation disguised as safety. The goal is to build a self so resilient, so rooted, so clear about your own worth that you can afford to be vulnerable because you know, truly know, that even if someone betrays you, even if trust is violated, even if your heart breaks, you will endure. You will heal. You will grow. And you will, when you're ready, risk trusting again. Because connection isn't just worth the risk of betrayal, it's the entire point of being human. As we step back and see the full landscape we've traversed, from the neuroscience of infant attachment to the social networks that spread trust like light, we recognize that this isn't really a story about trust, loyalty, and betrayal as separate concepts. It's a story about the fundamental human challenge, how to live fully in relationship with others while knowing those relationships can hurt us. How to stay open while staying wise. How to keep building bridges even after fires have burned them. We've traveled far together, through the science of connection and the psychology of pain. Now, as we move toward the heart of understanding, we must explore the subtler truths, the ways trust and betrayal reshape our identities, our futures, and our deepest beliefs about what it means to be human. The language we use to describe betrayal shapes how we heal from it. Linguistic analysis of people recovering from trust violations reveals striking patterns. Those who describe betrayal using passive language, "It happened to me, I was betrayed," show slower recovery than those who eventually incorporate active language, "I'm learning from this, I'm choosing how to respond." This isn't about victim blaming or denying someone's pain. It's about the subtle shift from seeing yourself as a passive recipient of harm to recognizing your agency in what comes next. The betrayal happened, that's unchangeable history. But the story you're living now, the meaning you make, the person you become, that's still being written. Language is where that authorship begins, in the verbs you choose and the narratives you construct. This power of narrative connects to something surprising about jealousy and trust. Jealousy isn't the opposite of trust, it's often a signal that something needs attention. Conventional wisdom treats jealousy as purely destructive, something to be eliminated or hidden. But evolutionary psychologists studying mate retention and attachment patterns found that moderate jealousy serves a protective function. It makes us pay attention to threats to valued relationships. The problem isn't jealousy itself but what we do with it. People in healthy relationships experience jealousy but use it as information. What does this feeling tell me about my needs? About the relationship? About my own insecurities? They communicate about it rather than acting from it. It's unchecked, unexamined jealousy that becomes toxic when it drives controlling behavior, constant suspicion, or accusations without evidence. The emotion itself is neutral. Our response determines whether it damages or deepens connection. Yet not all feelings deserve the weight we give them, and this brings us to something uncomfortable about intuition. Gut feelings about trustworthiness are often contaminated by bias and projection. While we discussed earlier that bodies sometimes detect lies before minds do, research on implicit bias shows that our instincts about who's trustworthy are heavily influenced by race, gender, class, appearance, and similarity to ourselves. People consistently rate those who look like them, speak like them, or share their background as more trustworthy, even with identical behavior. This means that "I just have a bad feeling about them" might not be wisdom, it might be prejudice. Distinguishing between genuine intuition and biased pattern matching requires honest self-examination. Ask yourself, is this feeling based on this person's actions or on categories they fit? On evidence or on stereotype? True discernment requires interrogating your own assumptions, not just trusting your gut blindly. This challenge of discernment reveals something about the relationship between transparency and trust. Complete transparency doesn't build trust, it often erodes it. Tech companies discovered this when implementing radical transparency policies that made all communications visible to all employees. Rather than increasing trust, it created performance anxiety, chilled authentic communication, and led people to move sensitive conversations to unofficial channels. The same pattern appears in relationships where partners share phone passwords and tracking apps. Sometimes trust increases temporarily, but often surveillance replaces actual trust. You're not trusting them, you're monitoring them. Real trust requires some opacity, some privacy, some recognition that people need internal space. Healthy boundaries aren't walls against connection, they're the structure that makes authentic connection possible. You can't truly choose to be trustworthy if someone is always watching, you're just complying. Now we must examine something that challenges our beliefs about loyalty and change. The most loyal thing you can do is sometimes to leave. We typically think of loyalty as staying, as commitment that persists regardless of circumstances. But therapists working with people in stagnant or harmful relationships emphasize that sometimes leaving is the most loyal thing, loyal to your own growth, to truth, even to the other person's potential. Staying in a relationship that's become toxic can enable someone's worst self, preventing the crisis that might catalyze their growth. Leaving can be an act of respect, acknowledging that this isn't working, that pretending helps no one, that both people deserve better even if that means being apart. This doesn't make leaving easy or always right, but it removes the assumption that staying automatically equals loyalty and leaving automatically equals betrayal. This nuance about loyalty connects to something profound about the stories relationships tell us about ourselves. People often betray relationships that contradict their emerging self-concept. Identity researchers studying people through major life transitions found a pattern. As someone's sense of self evolves, coming out, religious awakening, political radicalization, recovery from addiction, they often abandon relationships that reflect their old identity, even healthy ones. The childhood friend who knew you before becomes uncomfortable because they hold a version of you that you're trying to transcend. The partner who fell in love with who you were becomes an obstacle to who you're becoming. These endings feel like betrayal to those left behind, and in some ways they are. But they're also the painful friction of growth, the cost of becoming. Not all endings are failures, some are necessary deaths that make way for more authentic life. Yet growth doesn't always require ending, and this brings us to something hopeful about long-term bonds. Relationships that successfully navigate major changes develop what researchers call narrative flexibility. Couples, friends, and families who stay together across decades don't do so by keeping everything the same or by pretending differences don't matter. They develop the capacity to rewrite their shared story repeatedly, absorbing new information, accommodating changed circumstances, making room for both people to evolve while maintaining connection. They don't say this is who we are, but rather this is who we're becoming. Studies of 50-year marriages found that successful ones had essentially rebuilt themselves multiple times. The marriage at 25 bore little resemblance to the one at 45 or 65. Same people, different relationship, repeatedly chosen and reconstructed. This capacity for reconstruction reveals something about the neuroscience of habit and change in relationships. Breaking trust patterns requires literally building new neural pathways, not just wanting to change. Neuroscientists studying behavioral change emphasize that the brain's default mode network, the autopilot that runs most of our behavior, operates through well-worn pathways. If you've betrayed trust repeatedly or been betrayed and responded in certain ways, those patterns are literally etched into neural architecture. Changing them requires more than intention. It requires repetition of new behaviors until new pathways form and strengthen. This is why people often revert to old patterns under stress. The new neural highways aren't yet strong enough to compete with the old ones. Sustainable change requires patience, practice, and recognition that backsliding isn't moral failure, it's neurology. The work is building new roads in the brain, one choice at a time, until the new route becomes the default. This neurological reality helps us understand something about apologies and repair. The most effective apologies are behavioral, not verbal. Relationship research analyzing successful repair after trust violations found that words matter, but actions over time matter infinitely more. People who apologized eloquently but didn't change their behavior had worse outcomes than people who apologized poorly but demonstrated consistent change. The brain doesn't rewire based on promises, it rewires based on experience. Every time someone who hurt you does something differently, honors a boundary they used to violate, follows through when they used to flake, stays present when they used to withdraw, Your nervous system gets new data. After enough new data points, the system recalibrates. Maybe they really have changed. No single conversation creates this shift, only accumulated evidence does. And here, near the end of our journey, we must embrace perhaps the most paradoxical truth. The people who've never been betrayed often understand trust least deeply. Those who've moved through life with fundamental trust intact, never been cheated on, never been deeply deceived, never had their safety violated, sometimes have a surface-level understanding of trust. They trust because they haven't learned not to, which is beautiful but fragile. People who've been shattered and rebuilt often develop more sophisticated trust. They know precisely what they're risking, they've counted the cost, and they choose connection anyway. Their trust isn't naive, it's courageous. They've stared into the abyss of human capacity for harm and decided that connection still matters more than safety. If you've been betrayed and learned to trust again, not blindly but wisely, you've achieved something those who've never been tested may never understand: the difference between innocence and earned wisdom. As we prepare for the final stretch of our exploration, we carry with us this growing recognition that trust, loyalty, and betrayal aren't problems to be solved but paradoxes to be lived within, tensions that make us more fully human when we learn to hold them with grace. As we enter the deeper waters of understanding, we must now explore the ways trust and betrayal intersect with our most fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and what makes a life well lived. These aren't just psychological phenomena, they are spiritual and philosophical challenges that every person must eventually face. The capacity to trust is ultimately an expression of hope, not evidence. Philosophers studying the nature of trust have argued that at its deepest level, trust isn't a calculation based on probability or past behavior, it's a stance toward the world. When you trust, you're making a statement: I believe connection is possible. I believe people can be better than their worst moments. I believe the future can be different from the past. This is why betrayal wounds so deeply. It doesn't just violate a specific expectation, it attacks your fundamental hope about human nature and possibility. Rebuilding trust after betrayal isn't just about that relationship, it's about reconstructing your basic orientation toward existence. Can you still believe in goodness after witnessing harm? Can you still reach toward others after being burned? These are existential questions disguised as relational ones. This existential dimension reveals something about the relationship between trust and mortality. Awareness of death paradoxically both increases and decreases trust. Terror management theory research shows that when people are reminded of their mortality, they respond in two contradictory ways. Some become more tribal and defensive, trusting only their in-group while viewing outsiders with suspicion. Death anxiety makes them pull inward. Others become more generous and open, recognizing that life is brief and connection is what matters. Death awareness makes them reach outward. The difference seems to lie in whether someone's worldview is based on fear or love. Those operating from fear see death as a reason to protect themselves. Those operating from love see death as a reason to connect more deeply while they can. Betrayal often reveals which framework someone operates from. Yet even those operating from love must grapple with something painful about attachment and loss. Every deep bond contains within it the seed of potential grief. The same vulnerability that allows profound connection guarantees profound pain if that connection is severed, through betrayal, death, or simple divergence of paths. Buddhist philosophers have long emphasized this truth. Attachment is suffering not because love is wrong, but because everything changes and everything ends. Some people, after experiencing betrayal, try to protect themselves by never attaching deeply again. But this creates a different kind of suffering, the pain of isolation, of never being fully known. The wisdom isn't to avoid attachment but to love fully while holding lightly, to commit deeply while accepting impermanence. It's perhaps the most difficult balance humans must strike. This balance becomes especially challenging when we consider something about the nature of secrets and intimacy. Shared secrets create powerful bonds, but toxic secrets create invisible prisons. Anthropologists studying secret keeping across cultures found that when people share meaningful secrets, vulnerabilities, dreams, fears, It creates intense connection because secrecy implies trust and specialness. But when secrets are kept within relationships because of shame or fear, hidden addictions, concealed infidelities, undisclosed pasts, they create what therapists call intimacy barriers. You can't truly be close to someone while hiding significant parts of yourself. The relationship exists between personas, not between authentic selves. This is why discovering a long-held secret feels like betrayal even if the secret itself is relatively innocuous. It's not just about what was hidden, but about the false intimacy you've been living in. You thought you knew this person, but there was always a mask. These masks we wear connect to something fundamental about identity and authenticity. People betray themselves long before they betray others, through what psychologists call incremental inauthenticity. It rarely starts with major compromises. It begins with small disconnections from your true self, laughing at jokes you find offensive, agreeing with opinions you don't hold, minimizing needs you actually have, performing a version of yourself you think others want. Each small betrayal of self makes the next one easier, until eventually you're so disconnected from your authentic self that betraying others doesn't even register as such. You're already living at a distance from truth. The people who maintain integrity under pressure aren't necessarily stronger or more moral. They've often just maintained the practice of small authenticity, of staying connected to their truth in minor moments. So when major tests come, the pathway to integrity is well worn. This practice of authenticity reveals something about the role of community in maintaining trustworthiness. Humans are dramatically more trustworthy when embedded in communities that expect and reinforce trustworthiness. Sociological research on moral behavior shows that individual willpower is fragile, but communal accountability is powerful. People who participate in communities, whether religious congregations, recovery groups, professional organizations, or close friend networks, where trustworthiness is named as a value and violations are addressed, behave more reliably than equally well-intentioned people operating alone. This isn't weakness, it's design. We're social creatures who regulate our behavior through mutual witness and shared expectations. The person trying to be trustworthy in isolation, without community support or accountability, faces a much harder path than someone embedded in relationships that reflect back their values and gently correct their deviations. Yet community itself can become complicated when we examine something about in-group loyalty and ethical behavior. Strong group loyalty can increase trustworthiness within the group while decreasing ethical behavior toward outsiders. Studies of organizational cultures, religious communities, and political movements reveal this paradox repeatedly. As internal loyalty intensifies, the circle of moral concern often contracts. People become deeply trustworthy toward fellow members while feeling justified in deceiving, exploiting, or harming those outside the circle. This explains how genuinely good people participate in corporate fraud, religious abuse, or political corruption. They are being loyal to their group while betraying broader ethical principles. The most mature loyalty is one that can hold multiple circles simultaneously: loyalty to specific people and also to universal values, commitment to your community and also to truth that transcends that community. This tension between particular and universal loyalty connects to something about moral development across the lifespan. As people mature, their definition of loyalty typically expands from concrete relationships to abstract principles. Developmental psychologists mapping moral reasoning across ages found that children's loyalty is almost entirely to specific people, family, friends. Adolescents expand to include groups and identities, teams, nations, causes. But mature adults develop the capacity for what's called principled loyalty, allegiance to values like justice, truth, and dignity that can sometimes require betraying specific people or groups when they violate those principles. This is the loyalty of the whistleblower, the dissenter, the person who breaks ranks because their commitment to truth exceeds their commitment to comfort. Not everyone reaches this stage, and those who do often pay significant social costs, but it represents a kind of moral sophistication that purely relational loyalty lacks. This moral sophistication requires something specific that many people never develop. The ability to hold paradox is essential for navigating trust wisely. Black and white thinking. People are either trustworthy or not, loyal or disloyal, good or bad, creates a brittle understanding that shatters when reality's complexity intrudes. Mature trust requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. This person hurt me and they're not entirely bad. I was betrayed and I made choices that contributed. Loyalty matters, and sometimes you must break loyalty to serve higher goods. Trust is essential and trust is always a risk. Psychological research on cognitive complexity shows that people who can tolerate ambiguity, who can hold competing truths without needing to resolve them into simple answers, navigate betrayal and repair more successfully. They don't need villains and victims. They can sit with the messy reality that good people sometimes cause great harm, that love and hurt can coexist, that betrayal doesn't negate all that was real in what came before. And here's something that brings us nearly full circle to where we began this journey. The opposite of betrayal isn't loyalty, it's integrity. Loyalty is what you practice toward others. Integrity is what you practice toward yourself. Integrity means your internal values and external actions align, that you're the same person in private as in public, that you do what you said you'd do even when no one is watching. People with integrity might still fail, still hurt others, still make mistakes, but they own those failures rather than concealing or rationalizing them. The person with integrity who violates trust will acknowledge it, take responsibility, and work toward repair. The person without integrity will betray and then betray again by denying, deflecting, or blaming. In the end, you can't truly be trustworthy toward others if you're not first trustworthy to yourself, if you don't keep the promises you make in the quiet of your own heart, if you don't honor the person you claim to be. As we move toward the conclusion of our time together, we begin to see that everything we've explored, from neuroscience to philosophy, from individual psychology to cultural patterns, points toward a single truth, that trust is the infrastructure of human meaning, the foundation upon which everything else we value is built. We've journeyed through science and philosophy, psychology and wisdom. Now, as we approach the end of our exploration, we must gather the deepest truths, the ones that change how we live, how we love, and how we move forward after everything we've learned. Trust is the only force that can reduce complexity in human relationships. Systems theorists studying social coordination discovered something remarkable. In a world of infinite possibilities and unknowns, trust functions as a complexity reduction mechanism. When you trust someone, you don't need to calculate every possible outcome, monitor every action, or protect against every contingency. Trust allows you to act as if certain positive outcomes are assured, freeing mental and emotional energy for everything else life demands. This is why high-trust societies and relationships are more efficient, more creative, more resilient, not because they have fewer problems, but because trust allows them to address problems without the constant overhead of suspicion and verification. Betrayal, then, doesn't just damage one relationship. It forces you back into exhausting complexity, recalculating everything, trusting nothing. It's cognitively and emotionally depleting in ways that extend far beyond the immediate hurt. This depletion reveals something about the economics of relationships that we rarely acknowledge. Every relationship operates on an implicit exchange rate between investment and return. Behavioral economists studying social bonds found that humans unconsciously track what they give versus what they receive, not in a petty, transactional way, but as a deep assessment of whether the relationship is sustainable. When someone consistently invests more than they receive back, resentment builds even in loving relationships. When someone consistently takes more than they give, they may not consciously recognize it, but the relationship slowly hollows out. Betrayal often emerges when this balance has been distorted for too long. The person who felt perpetually overdrawn finally withdraws everything, or the person who's been overinvesting reaches a breaking point. The healthiest relationships aren't those without imbalance, but those where both people notice imbalances and actively work to restore equilibrium before resentment calcifies into something harder. Yet not all giving and receiving can be measured, which brings us to something profound about gratitude and loyalty. Gratitude is the emotional mechanism that sustains long-term bonds. Neuroscientists studying the gratitude response found that when we feel genuinely grateful for someone, it activates reward centers in the brain and releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This creates a positive feedback loop. Gratitude makes us feel good, which makes us want to maintain the relationship, which leads to more gratitude-inducing experiences. But here's the crucial part. Gratitude must be felt and expressed regularly, not just occasionally. Relationships where people stop noticing what they appreciate, where they take each other's contributions for granted, slowly suffocate. The gratitude doesn't need to be dramatic or constant, but it needs to be present, a recognition that this person's existence in your life is a gift, not an entitlement. When gratitude dies, loyalty often follows, because you've lost sight of what you're being loyal to. This loss of sight connects to something about attention and presence in relationships. The quality of attention you give someone is often more important than the quantity of time. Psychological studies of relationship satisfaction found that couples who spent less time together but with full presence and engagement reported higher satisfaction than couples who spent more time together but distracted or partially present. In our age of constant digital distraction, this has become a critical trust issue. When someone is physically present but mentally absent, scrolling, checking notifications, half listening, it communicates that something else matters more. Over time, this partial presence becomes its own form of betrayal, a consistent message that you're not quite worth full attention. The inverse is also true. People who give full, undivided attention, even in brief moments, create profound bonds. They're saying through their attention, right now, nothing matters more than you. This is why the most meaningful connections often happen not in grand gestures but in small moments of complete presence. These small moments accumulate into something researchers have identified as crucial for lasting bonds. Relationships are built more on mundane reliability than on dramatic gestures. The mythology of romance and friendship emphasizes grand declarations, significant sacrifices, extraordinary moments. But longitudinal studies of successful relationships reveal a different picture. What matters most is showing up consistently in ordinary ways. The friend who texts back reliably, not necessarily immediately but predictably. The partner who does their share of household tasks without being asked. The colleague who meets deadlines and keeps confidences. These aren't story-worthy moments, but they are trust-building moments. The brain doesn't distinguish between types of promises. Kept promises about small things build the same neural pathways as kept promises about big things. Someone who's reliable about minor commitments is training both their own brain and yours to expect follow-through. Someone who's flaky about small things will struggle to be trustworthy about large things, because the neural infrastructure for reliability hasn't been built. This infrastructure of reliability connects to something about repair and resilience in relationships. The speed of repair matters almost as much as whether repair happens. Research on conflict resolution in various relationship types found that the time gap between rupture and repair significantly affects outcomes. When someone hurts you and addresses it quickly, acknowledging the harm, apologizing, discussing how to prevent recurrence, the relationship often emerges stronger because both people have demonstrated that problems can be faced and solved. But when repair is delayed, whether through avoidance, pride, or simply not prioritizing the relationship, the wound begins to define the relationship more than the bond itself. Each day that passes without repair tells a story. This relationship isn't safe enough to address hurt directly, or this person isn't important enough to prioritize, or conflict is too dangerous to approach. Quick repair says, our connection matters more than our comfort. It's worth being uncomfortable to preserve what we have. Yet even with quick repair and good intentions, some damage runs too deep, which brings us to something difficult about irreparable harm. Some betrayals create moral injuries that permanently alter relationships even with sincere repair efforts. Psychologists studying trauma in combat veterans identified moral injury, damage to one's core sense of right and wrong, violation of deeply held values in ways that can't be rationalized away. This concept applies beyond combat to any betrayal that shatters fundamental beliefs about what's acceptable. When someone crosses a line you didn't even know needed to be defended, abuses a child, commits violence, perpetrates cruelty, repair in the traditional sense becomes nearly impossible because the injury isn't just to the relationship but to your moral universe. You can forgive, you can understand contributing factors, you can even maintain some form of connection, but something has permanently changed. Acknowledging this isn't cynicism, it's recognizing that some boundaries, once crossed, redraw the map entirely. This redrawing of maps reveals something about identity and transformation after betrayal. Betrayal can serve as what researchers call a crystallizing experience, a moment that fundamentally reorients your life trajectory. Studies of people who made major life changes found that betrayals often served as catalysts, forcing clarity about values, priorities, and what kind of life they wanted to live. The person whose marriage ended due to infidelity who then built a career helping others through divorce. The employee betrayed by a corrupt organization who became a whistleblower advocate. The friend abandoned in crisis who created communities of mutual support. These aren't redemption narratives that erase harm or claim everything happens for a reason. They're examples of people who refused to let betrayal be the final word, who alchemized pain into purpose. Not everyone reaches this transformation, and those who do often take years to get there, but it represents a kind of meaning-making that honors both the hurt and the growth that emerged from it. This transformation requires something specific that connects to our earliest discussions about trust. Post-traumatic growth from betrayal requires reconnecting with your fundamental worthiness. Trauma therapists emphasize that betrayal attacks your sense of deserving goodness. If you were worthy of love, loyalty, respect, surely this wouldn't have happened. This logic is false but emotionally compelling. Healing requires disconnecting your worth from others' treatment of you. You are worthy not because you've never been betrayed but because worthiness is inherent, not earned through others' good behavior toward you. Someone else's betrayal reveals their brokenness, their struggles, their failures, not your inadequacy. This isn't about blame shifting or refusing to examine your contributions to relationship dynamics. It's about understanding that even if you made mistakes, even if you could have done things differently, betrayal was still a choice someone else made, and their choice doesn't diminish your fundamental worth as a human being. And here, as we near the very end of our journey, we must embrace the truth that encompasses everything we've explored. The willingness to trust again after betrayal is the ultimate act of courage. Not blind trust, not naive trust, but conscious trust, trust that knows the cost, that remembers the pain, that understands the risk, and chooses connection anyway. This is different from the trust of innocence, which hasn't been tested. This is earned wisdom, battle-scarred faith in human possibility despite human failure. When you've been shattered and you slowly rebuild yourself, and then you look at the world and decide you'll still let people in, still make yourself vulnerable, still believe that connection matters more than safety, that's not foolishness. That's the bravery of someone who's counted the cost and deemed it worthwhile. That's the courage of someone who refuses to let fear have the final word, who insists that love, connection, and trust remain possible even in a world where betrayal exists. As we prepare for the final reflections of our time together, we carry with us this accumulation of understanding, scientific, philosophical, practical, and deeply human. We've traveled together through the landscape of human connection, from the firing of infant neurons to the philosophical depths of meaning-making. Now, as our journey reaches its end, we must gather what we've learned and understand how it all weaves together into a single, coherent truth about what it means to be human. Trust is fundamentally a biological imperative before it's a choice. We began with the infant reaching for a caregiver, and we return to this image now with deeper understanding. Every human who survives infancy does so because someone was trustworthy enough to keep them alive. Trust isn't optional, it's the foundation of human survival itself. We are born vulnerable, requiring years of care, capable of nothing alone. Our species succeeded not through individual strength but through cooperative bonds, through the willingness to depend on others and to be dependable in return. When we trust, we're not being naive or weak, we're expressing our deepest evolutionary heritage, the strategy that allowed humans to dominate the planet despite our physical limitations. Yet this biological imperative plays out in a world far more complex than our ancestors knew, which brings us to something about modern life and trust. The scale of modern society has outpaced our trust mechanisms. Our brains evolved for tribes of 50 to 150 people, where reputation mattered intensely and betrayal had immediate consequences. Now we navigate systems with millions of participants, where strangers make decisions that affect our lives, where digital interactions replace face-to-face accountability. This mismatch explains much of our contemporary anxiety. We're trying to trust in contexts our brains weren't designed for, extending vulnerability to people and systems we can never truly know. The solution isn't to retreat into small tribes but to recognize the challenge. We must consciously build trust infrastructure, laws, institutions, social norms, technological safeguards that our biology alone cannot provide. These systems we build reflect something fundamental about collective wisdom. Societies that ritualize trust building and repair tend to be more resilient. Anthropologists studying cultures worldwide found that communities with formal practices for creating and restoring trust, initiation rituals, reconciliation ceremonies, public accountability processes, communal celebrations, weather crises better than those relying solely on individual relationships. These rituals aren't primitive superstition, they are sophisticated social technology that makes the invisible visible, that transforms abstract trust into concrete experience. When we've lost many of these practices in modern secular society, we've lost important tools for managing the trust challenges we face. Perhaps we need new rituals for our time, ways of marking commitments, addressing violations, and celebrating trustworthiness that match our contemporary lives. This need for new practices connects to something about teaching the next generation. How we model trust and betrayal for children shapes society for decades. Every parent, teacher, and mentor is passing on not just values but actual neural templates for how trust works. When we keep our promises to children, when we acknowledge our mistakes, when we model repair after rupture, when we demonstrate that people can be trustworthy without being perfect, we're literally building the trust architecture of the next generation's brains. Conversely, when we betray children through abuse, neglect, or chronic unreliability, or when we teach them that trust is foolish or that everyone will hurt them, we're creating tomorrow's trust-damaged adults. The way forward for humanity on the questions of trust and betrayal isn't just individual healing, it's breaking intergenerational cycles, one relationship at a time. Breaking these cycles requires something we've touched on throughout but must now state directly. Healing from betrayal is not a linear process but a spiral. You don't progress steadily from hurt to healed, from broken to whole. You circle back through anger, through grief, through disbelief. You think you're past it and then something triggers the pain afresh. This isn't failure or regression, it's how integration works. Each time you spiral back through the pain, you're processing it at a deeper level, understanding it from a new angle, incorporating it more fully into your story. The spiral eventually widens, the visits to the pain become less frequent and less intense, but they may never disappear entirely. And that's okay. Healing doesn't mean forgetting or becoming unbothered. It means the wound becomes part of your story without being the whole story, a chapter that informs your journey without defining your destination. This journey of integration reveals something about wisdom and aging. The relationship between trust and wisdom is not what we typically imagine. We often think wisdom makes you more cautious, more protective, harder to deceive. But studies of elder wisdom across cultures reveal something different. Wise elders tend to be selectively trusting in sophisticated ways. They're not universally trusting or universally suspicious. They've developed keen discernment about contexts, about which risks are worth taking, about the difference between healthy vulnerability and foolish exposure. They can hold paradoxes we've discussed, being open while being boundaried, being generous while being realistic, being hopeful while being clear-eyed. This wisdom isn't something you're born with, it's earned through exactly the kind of experiences we've explored, through trusting and being rewarded, through trusting and being betrayed, through learning to distinguish between the two. And this discernment connects to perhaps the most practical wisdom we can carry forward. The best predictor of future trustworthiness is not someone's words but the pattern of their repair. Everyone fails sometimes. Everyone hurts people they love. Everyone makes promises they can't keep. The question isn't whether someone will ever let you down. They will. The question is, what do they do next? Do they acknowledge the harm or deny it? Do they take responsibility or deflect blame? Do they make excuses or make amends? Do they change their behavior or repeat the pattern? Someone who repairs poorly once might deserve a second chance. Someone who repairs poorly repeatedly is teaching you who they are, believe them. But someone who consistently acknowledges harm, takes responsibility, makes genuine amends, and demonstrates changed behavior over time, that person has earned trust not despite their failures but because of how they've handled them. This pattern recognition brings us to something about self-trust that we've circled around throughout our journey. The most important trust to rebuild after betrayal is trust in yourself. When someone betrays you, especially someone close, it doesn't just damage your trust in them, it damages your trust in your own judgment. You question how you didn't see it coming, why you didn't listen to warning signs, whether you can trust your own perceptions and decisions. Rebuilding trust in others is important, but rebuilding trust in yourself is essential. This happens through small acts of self-integrity, honoring your own boundaries, following through on commitments to yourself, listening to your intuition even when it's uncomfortable, making choices aligned with your values even when it's difficult. Every time you prove to yourself that you're trustworthy to yourself, you rebuild the foundation that makes trusting others possible again. This self-trust is the bridge that connects everything we've learned. Trust, loyalty, and betrayal are not separate phenomena but different expressions of how we navigate the fundamental human paradox. We are individuals who cannot survive alone. We need connection, but connection requires vulnerability. We need to trust, but trust risks betrayal. We need loyalty, but loyalty can conflict with growth. We are caught in this paradox from our first breath to our last, utterly dependent yet seeking autonomy, desperately wanting connection yet fearing the loss of self it might require. Every relationship is an attempt to solve this unsolvable paradox, to find the balance between closeness and separateness, between vulnerability and protection, between opening and guarding. There is no final solution to this paradox, no ultimate answer that resolves the tension. But there is wisdom in how we hold the tension, and this brings us to our final truth. The meaning of trust isn't in never being betrayed, it's in choosing connection despite knowing betrayal is possible. This is what we've been building toward through all these facts, all these insights, all this understanding. Trust is not naive belief that people won't hurt you. Trust is the clear-eyed recognition that they might, and the decision to reach toward them anyway. Loyalty is not blind adherence regardless of harm. Loyalty is the committed choice to keep showing up, keep working through difficulties, keep honoring bonds even when it costs you something. And betrayal, painful as it is not the end of your story. It's a chapter that teaches you something essential about resilience, about boundaries, about your own strength, about the kind of person you want to be. We stand now at the end of our journey, but really at the beginning of yours. You carry with you now a map of this territory, the neuroscience and psychology, the philosophy and wisdom, the patterns and paradoxes. You understand that trust is built in the body before the mind, that betrayal registers as pain because it threatens survival, that loyalty requires active maintenance, that repair is possible but requires specific steps, that your worthiness isn't determined by others' treatment of you, that healing spirals rather than progresses linearly, and that the courage to trust again after betrayal is perhaps the most profound choice a human can make. The playground where we began this journey, two children, one extending a hand to help the other climb, that image contains everything. The hand extended in trust, the risk of falling, the possibility of being caught, the climb attempted together. This is the human story, repeated billions of times in billions of variations, from the beginning of our species to this present moment. You will trust and sometimes be betrayed. You will be loyal and sometimes question whether it's worth it. You will hurt people you love and be hurt by people who love you. This is not a bug in the system, it's the system itself, the price and privilege of being human, of needing and being needed, of living in connection rather than isolation. The question was never whether to trust, whether to risk, whether to stay vulnerable in a world where hurt is possible. The question is, knowing all of this, understanding the full landscape of trust and betrayal, how will you choose to live? Will you let fear close you off, or will you let courage keep you open? Will you let betrayal define your capacity for connection, or will you let it deepen your wisdom about how to connect well? In the end, trust is an act of faith, not blind faith, but clear-eyed faith. Faith that connection matters more than safety. Faith that love is worth the risk of loss. Faith that even in a world where betrayal exists, trustworthiness still matters, loyalty still counts, integrity still shapes who we become. This is the architecture of trust, built on biology, shaped by experience, tested by betrayal, and ultimately chosen by courage. It's the infrastructure of everything that makes life worth living: love, friendship, community, meaning itself. And now you know. You've traveled through the territory. You've seen the landscape in all its complexity. What you do with this knowledge, how you trust, how you repair, how you remain open while becoming wise, that's your story to write.